All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to trace the absolutely wild, chaotic ripple effects of a single global conflict. I mean, it is pretty rare we get to see the geopolitical dominoes fall in real time, quite like this. But that is exactly what the data and recent events are showing us. So, to really wrap our heads around the scale of this whole thing, we're going to track the shockwaves of the latest news. We'll start right at the epicenter and literally watch it spread across the map. Think about it. How does a standoff in the Middle East trigger massive troop movements in Europe and sudden takeover threats in the Caribbean? Honestly, it sounds like the plot of some crazy political thriller, right? But it is exactly what is unfolding right now. Let's break it down together. Part 1. The U.S.-Iran standoff. Let's look at the core epicenter first. The messaging coming out from both sides presents two entirely different, almost alternate realities. On one hand, President Trump formally sent a letter to Congress stating hostilities with Iran have been terminated. Boom. By doing this, he effectively declared the war over. And this is a massive procedural move because it allowed him to completely bypass a strict legal deadline that would have required congressional approval for any further military action. But then we get this. In stark contrast, literally more than 24 hours after the U.S. declaration, a senior Iranian military official goes on state media with a really stark warning. They plainly stated their armed forces are fully prepared for any new adventures or foolishness. They clearly view renewed conflict not just as a remote chance, but as highly likely. And they explicitly cited their belief that the U.S. simply isn't committed to its agreements. It's a total 180 from the whole terminated hostilities narrative. And adding to the absolute whiplash of this whole situation, just hours after sending that letter saying the war was over, the U.S. messaging shifted drastically again. With peace talks seemingly stalled out, President Trump openly suggested the U.S. might actually be better off not making a deal at all. He followed that up with a stark choice, questioning whether the U.S. should just blast the hell out of him and finish him forever or try to make a deal. This rapid shifting in tone, yeah, it perfectly captures the extreme volatility we're analyzing today. Moving on to part 2, the Strait of Hormuz blockade. Because, words and stalled negotiations actually have real-world physical consequences. Right now, a U.S. naval blockade is in full force, and the Strait of Hormuz remains totally closed off. And we all know this isn't just some minor regional inconvenience. This is a massive disruption to the global shipping lanes and international energy markets that the entire world relies on. So, to deal with this massive closure, the administration is actively asking international partners to jump in and join a brand new coalition. And they've got 3 specific goals here: help reopen the strait, coordinate ongoing diplomatic efforts, and strictly enforce international sanctions. But asking for global help brings us directly to our next major ripple effect, which is part 3, the NATO ally fallout. A sudden, pretty severe transatlantic rift has just blown wide open. On one side, we see harsh public criticism from the German Chancellor, who openly stated that the Americans clearly have no strategy and are being humiliated by Iranian negotiators. Yikes. On the flip side, President Trump has repeatedly blasted NATO allies for just standing by and not getting directly involved in the Iran war. It's a really profound diplomatic clash between traditional partners. And that brings us to the concrete retaliation. 5,000. In response to Germany's criticism, the president ordered the Pentagon to pull 5,000 U.S. troops straight out of German soil. So this isn't just heated rhetoric anymore. It's a massive, tangible shift in military posturing right in the middle of Europe, all stemming directly from disagreements over the Middle East. If we look at the timeline, this huge military reshuffling is slated to happen incredibly fast. The Pentagon's essentially been given a window of just 6 to 12 months to completely execute this withdrawal of 5,000 personnel. It's a rapid acceleration of military alignment that, honestly, very few people saw coming just days ago. Let's jump to part 4, bypassing Congress for arms. We can actually track how stalled diplomacy directly led the executive branch to sidestep standard legislative oversight in 3 really quick steps. First, that legal deadline for military action was completely bypassed. Second, peace talks stalled out. And third, reacting directly to those stalled talks, the State Department invoked special emergency powers.
Now, by using that specific emergency authority, the administration fast-tracked an absolutely astonishing $8.6 billion in arms sales to partners in the Middle East. $8.6 billion. And remember, this was done entirely by sidestepping congressional approval. What's even wilder to think about is that since this war began, the U.S. has already used that exact same emergency authority to push through billions more in sales. It's a huge shift in how domestic powers are being leveraged to manage an overseas crisis.
Finally, Part 5, the pivot to Cuba.
Here's where the standoff suddenly shifts hemispheres entirely. President Trump bluntly stated that the U.S. would be taking over Cuba almost immediately after the war in Iran is over. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. A conflict centered in the Persian Gulf has spontaneously generated a direct takeovers threat against an island nation in the Caribbean.
And this threat arrives at a deeply, deeply vulnerable time for them. Cuba is currently enduring severe internal crises. Their economy is struggling massively, and everyday citizens are frequently going without basic necessities like power and even food. So it is an incredibly precarious moment for the country to suddenly find itself in the crosshairs of U.S. military ambition. But despite those massive internal struggles, Havana's response was immediate. The Cuban presidents fired back instantly with this defiant statement: "No aggressor, no matter how powerful, will find surrender in Cuba." So the rhetoric is escalating on an entirely new front, thousands of miles away from the original dispute.
Which leaves us with a pretty critical question to chew on. As a single conflict sends military, economic, and diplomatic shockwaves from the Middle East to Europe and all the way to the Caribbean, how will these multi-front shifts permanently reshape the global order tomorrow? It truly highlights how deeply interconnected and, frankly, fragile our modern geopolitical landscape really is. One stalled negotiation in one part of the world can literally move troops and threaten nations across the globe. Keep your eyes on these shifting pieces, because the map is being redrawn as we speak. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope this helped you structure and make sense of the incredible scale of what we're watching unfold.